Cassandra had always envisioned owning a residence where she could finally move past her former life. Following a tumultuous divorce that left her emotionally exhausted, she succeeded in purchasing a charming home in a serene suburban area. The house wasn't lavish, but it featured an element that captured her heart instantly. The moment she laid eyes on it during an open house was when she saw an immaculate, crystal-clear swimming pool tucked away in the backyard. To Cassandra, the pool represented more than mere luxury. It was her refuge, a sanctuary where she could unwind, reflect, and gradually rebuild herself each day. The initial weeks after relocating were idyllic. She spent her evenings beside the pool, enjoying iced tea, feeling the gentle breeze on her skin, and relishing the tranquility. The neighborhood exuded peace, and although she hadn't yet become acquainted with many of her neighbors, she valued the absence of turmoil. After all she had endured, the quiet was a precious gift. This peace was disrupted one late afternoon when Cassandra encountered Linda. Cassandra had been caring for the flowers she had planted along the backyard fence when Linda appeared. A statuesque woman in her 50s with impeccably styled blonde hair and a sharp grin, Linda approached as if she owned the entire street. She leaned casually against the fence, holding a glass of iced lemonade, her vibrant floral dress gently swaying in the breeze. "Hello there, you must be the new resident," Linda began, her tone warm yet carrying a hint of familiarity that seemed almost scripted. Cassandra straightened up, wiping her hands on her jeans, and nodded with a courteous smile. "Yes, I'm Cassandra. I moved in a few weeks ago." "Welcome, I'm Linda from Two Homes Down," she continued, gesturing vaguely toward the other side of the street. "It's such a lovely little community. Everyone here knows each other. You're going to adore it." Cassandra thanked her, remaining somewhat cautious. Linda didn't appear to notice, her gaze drifting past Cassandra to the pool glimmering in the sunlight. Oh my, that pool is absolutely stunning. The children must be enjoying it. Cassandra blinked, momentarily surprised. "I don't have any kids." Linda tilted her head, her expression subtly changing as if to think, then took another sip of her lemonade and leaned in closer to the fence. "How unusual. Maintaining it on your own must be quite the task. Pools can be so complicated. The pH levels, the filters, the cleaning. I used to have one at my previous home, and it was such a hassle. If you ever need any tips, I'd be glad to help. My grandchildren would absolutely love a pool like this. Maybe one weekend we could come by for a quick swim." Cassandra's polite smile faltered. She wasn't accustomed to such directness. The thought of Linda's grandchildren or anyone else intruding on her carefully maintained peace immediately made her uneasy. "I appreciate the offer, but I prefer to keep things private," she responded firmly, hoping to conclude the interaction. Linda's expression wavered for a split second before her smile returned, albeit more tightly. "Of course, it's your home after all. It's just a pity when something like that isn't fully utilized. But no problem. Let me know if you ever change your mind." Cassandra nodded curtly, wishing Linda would take her leave. However, Linda lingered a bit longer, her eyes once again scanning the backyard with what Cassandra could only interpret as hidden calculation. Finally, Linda stepped back and waved her glass in farewell. "Well, don't hesitate to reach out if you need anything. I'm always nearby," she said cheerfully before turning and walking away, her heels clicking on the pavement. Cassandra exhaled deeply as Linda disappeared down the street. Something about her demeanor felt intrusive, as though she had crossed an invisible boundary without permission. Cassandra shook her head, attempting to dismiss the feeling. Maybe Linda was simply overly friendly, someone who didn't grasp the concept of personal space. For a time, things remained calm. Linda didn't visit again, allowing Cassandra to settle into her new routine. She spent her mornings jogging around the neighborhood, her afternoons handling minor home improvement tasks, and her evenings relaxing by the pool with a book and her favorite music softly playing in the background. Occasionally, though, Cassandra would catch sight of Linda, sometimes walking her dog past the house, slowing just enough to peer over the fence, other times spotting Linda at the end of the street, engaging animatedly with other neighbors as if recounting an epic tale. Each sighting made Cassandra's stomach tighten. She reassured herself that she was being paranoid. Linda was merely a nosy neighbor, nothing more. Then came the first peculiar incident. One morning, Cassandra woke to discover a basket left on her doorstep. It was filled with baked treats, cookies, muffins, a loaf of bread, and a handwritten note that read, "Welcome to the neighborhood." No name was signed, but Cassandra strongly suspected Linda. She hesitated before bringing the basket inside, her instincts suggesting it felt more like an intrusion than a friendly gesture. The second incident was harder to overlook. Late one night, Cassandra heard an odd noise from the backyard. A faint splash followed by a muffled clinking sound. Her heart raced as she grabbed a flashlight and cautiously stepped outside. The pool appeared untouched, but as she looked around, she noticed something unusual. A small gardening trowel lay near the pool's edge, despite her not having done any gardening in days. Cassandra's unease intensified. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been in her backyard, yet there were no signs of forced entry. She double-checked the gate locks and decided to install a basic alarm system the next day. It wasn't much, but it provided a slight sense of security. What Cassandra didn't realize was that this was only the beginning. Linda wasn't just a meddlesome neighbor with a love for lemonade and gossip. She was something far more sinister. And as Cassandra would soon discover, her new life of peace and solitude was about to be disrupted in unimaginable ways. A few weeks had passed since Cassandra's unsettling encounter with Linda, and life around the house had returned to a semblance of normal. The alarm system she installed offered some peace of mind, and she gradually became comfortable in her new home. The backyard had become her favorite haven, where the pool sparkled invitingly under the sun. She had even started planning a small garden near the patio, envisioning lush flowers and climbing vines that would enhance the space's serenity. That tranquility was shattered early one Friday morning. Cassandra stepped into her backyard with a steaming cup of coffee, intending to enjoy the fresh morning air, but her breath caught in her throat. The pool was empty, completely empty. Cassandra blinked, her heart skipping a beat as she approached the pool's edge. The once glittering water surface was gone, replaced by a dry, gray stretch of concrete. Her eyes searched the area for an explanation, but nothing seemed out of place except for the glaring absence of water. She crouched near the drain at the bottom of the pool and noticed faint scratches around the metal cap, as though someone had tampered with it. Her stomach sank. There was no way this was accidental. Cassandra's mind raced as she tried to understand what had happened. She hadn't heard any unusual noises the previous night, and her alarm system hadn't been triggered. But the sight of the drained pool sent a wave of unease through her. Someone had done this intentionally. She was certain of it. Before she could delve further into her thoughts, a familiar voice broke the silence. "Oh no, what happened to your pool?" Cassandra turned sharply, finding Linda standing on the other side of the fence, dressed in a bright jogging outfit and clutching a water bottle. Her tone was thick with fake concern, her eyes wide with apparent sympathy. "I have no idea," Cassandra replied tersely, straightening up and crossing her arms. She wasn't in the mood for Linda's meddling, especially not now. Linda tilted her head, her lips curling into a slight smile. "Such a pity pools are so hard to maintain, aren't they? Maybe there's a leak somewhere." She paused, as if savoring her next words. "Did you leave the drain open by mistake?" Cassandra's jaw tightened. "No, I didn't. Someone must have tampered with it." Linda gasped, her hand fluttering to her chest in an exaggerated gesture of shock. "Tampered? Oh, that's awful. Do you think it was the kids? Sometimes teenagers around here like to cause trouble. Harmless pranks mostly, but this..." She trailed off, shaking her head. Cassandra forced a tight smile, resisting the urge to lash out. "I'll handle it, thanks." Linda's smile faltered for a split second before she regained it. "Well, if you need any help, just let me know. My husband used to be great at fixing things like this. I'm sure we could figure something out together." "I'll keep that in mind," Cassandra responded curtly, turning her back on Linda and walking toward the house. She didn't want to give the woman the satisfaction of seeing how rattled she was. Once inside, Cassandra locked the door and leaned against it, her mind racing. She couldn't prove it, but every instinct told her that Linda was responsible. The smugness in her voice, the way she seemed almost pleased by the situation, it all felt too coincidental. But without evidence, confronting her would only worsen matters. Cassandra spent the rest of the morning contacting local pool maintenance companies, hoping to get the pool refilled and inspected for any damage. Most were booked for weeks, but one company agreed to send a technician the following afternoon. She felt a flicker of relief, though it did little to ease the lingering sense of violation. The next day, the technician arrived, a middle-aged man with a no-nonsense demeanor and a clipboard under his arm. He examined the pool thoroughly, noting the scratches around the drain and confirming Cassandra's suspicions. "This wasn't an accident," he stated plainly. "Someone definitely opened the drain manually. You should consider getting a lock for it." Cassandra nodded, her stomach twisting with a mix of anger and apprehension. "Can you refill it today?" "Sure, but it's going to take a while," the technician replied. "We'll also run a chemical test to ensure nothing harmful was left behind." By late afternoon, the pool was refilled, and Cassandra felt a small measure of relief as she watched the water ripple under the sun once more. She had the technician install a secure lock on the drain, hoping it would deter any future tampering. But that night, as she sat in her living room trying to unwind, a soft knock at the front door startled her. She hesitated briefly before opening it to find Linda standing there, holding a tray of cookies wrapped in cellophane. "I just wanted to check on you," Linda said with a saccharine smile, extending the tray. "I heard about the technicians earlier. I hope everything's okay now." Cassandra stared at the tray, her instincts screaming that this was no innocent gesture. "It's fine," she responded shortly, taking the tray out of politeness but making no move to invite Linda inside. "That's good to hear," Linda said, her smile unwavering. "You know, we all look out for each other around here. It's such a tight-knit community. If you ever need anything, or if the pool becomes too much to handle, I'd be happy to help. Just let me know." Cassandra closed the door before Linda could say more, her hands trembling as she placed the tray on the kitchen counter. She didn't touch the cookies. The following morning, Cassandra woke to find a new surprise waiting for her. A laminated sign taped to her backyard gate. In bold red letters, it read, "Private property danger, hazardous area." Cassandra's blood boiled. She stormed out to the gate, ripping the sign down and scanning the yard for any signs of Linda. She was nowhere to be seen, but Cassandra had no doubt Linda was behind this. It was clear that Linda wasn't just a nosy neighbor. She was escalating her efforts to stake an unspoken claim over the pool and intimidate Cassandra into backing down. But Cassandra wasn't about to let that happen. She wasn't the same person she had been before the divorce. Timid, unsure, and quick to avoid confrontation. If Linda wanted to play games, Cassandra decided she would play smart, methodical, and most importantly, be prepared for whatever came next. What Cassandra didn't yet realize was that Linda wasn't finished by any means. This was only the opening salvo in a battle that would soon engulf not just their backyards, but the entire neighborhood. And as much as Cassandra wanted to believe she could handle it alone, she was about to discover just how far Linda was willing to go to achieve her aims. Cassandra had hoped that the lock on the pool drain and her refusal to engage with Linda would end the bizarre conflict, but she was wrong. The following days brought a series of subtle yet deliberate provocations that made it evident Linda was intensifying her efforts. Cassandra tried to convince herself it was all in her head, but each incident chipped away at her confidence. One morning, she found her trash bins knocked over, spilling their contents onto the street. Initially, she thought it might have been the wind, but the bins were too heavy for a gust to topple, and the way they were tipped suggested intent. Another time, her garden hose was left stretched across the yard, its nozzle twisted off with water dripping from the connection. Cassandra knew she hadn't used it recently. The breaking point came one evening when Cassandra returned home after running errands to find the pool water a murky, unnatural green. Her stomach churned as she approached the edge and smelled a sharp, almost metallic odor emanating from the water. Floating on the surface were pieces of plastic, what seemed like food scraps, banana peels, empty soda cans, and even an old shoe. Cassandra's hands clenched into fists. Someone had turned her pool into a dumping ground. The gate lock was intact, so whoever did this must have climbed over the fence. Her mind immediately went to Linda, but the audacity of the act left her momentarily speechless. Determined to document everything, Cassandra took photos of the scene before calling the pool maintenance company again. The technician from her previous visit arrived the next morning, shaking his head as he inspected the mess. "This isn't just trash," he said, pointing to the water. "Something's been dumped in here, maybe a chemical or some kind of solvent. We'll need to drain it completely and scrub the walls before it's safe to refill." Cassandra nodded, her frustration boiling over. "How long will that take?" "About a week, possibly more, depending on the damage," the technician replied. "I'd also recommend installing some cameras if you haven't already." Her jaw tightened. She had considered cameras before, but now it felt like her only option. After the technician left, she ordered a set of motion-activated cameras online and arranged for their professional installation. She refused to let this continue unchecked. That evening, as Cassandra was reviewing her receipts and organizing maintenance invoices, there was another knock at the door. She hesitated, already suspecting who it might be. Sure enough, Linda stood on the porch, her ever-present smile fixed on her face. "I heard about the pool," Linda said, feigning concern. "Such a shame. I hope it isn't too expensive to fix." Cassandra stared at her, struggling to maintain her composure. "It's being taken care of," she replied curtly. Linda's smile didn't falter. "Good, good. It's really unfortunate how things like this happen. It almost seems like the pool is causing you more stress than it's worth. I can't help but wonder if it's really worth keeping." Cassandra's eyes narrowed. "What are you implying, Linda?" Linda tilted her head, her smile growing sharper. "Oh, nothing, just thinking out loud. But you know, if you ever decide it's too much trouble, I'm sure there are plenty of people in the neighborhood who would love to help you repurpose that space." Cassandra's grip on the door tightened. She couldn't prove Linda was behind the sabotage, but her smug tone and subtle suggestions were infuriating. "Thanks for your concern, but I'm not interested," Cassandra said, her voice icy. Linda's expression faltered for a split second before she recovered. "Well, just remember, we're all neighbors here. It's important to look out for each other. You never know when you might need a little help." Cassandra shut the door before Linda could say more, her hands shaking with anger. Enough was enough. If Linda thought she could bully her into abandoning the pool, or worse, the property itself, she was in for a rude awakening. The next day, the cameras were installed, covering the backyard, gate, and the house's perimeter. Cassandra felt a small sense of relief, knowing she would finally have concrete evidence if Linda or anyone else tried something again. She didn't have to wait long. 2 nights later, the motion sensors triggered an alert on Cassandra's phone. Groggy and disoriented, she opened the app and watched in disbelief as a shadowy figure climbed over the fence and crept toward the pool. The figure paused at the edge, looking around before reaching into a bag and pulling out a small container. Cassandra's heart pounded as she watched the intruder pour the liquid into the pool. She didn't need to guess who it was. The cameras clearly captured Linda's profile as she stood there surveying her handiwork. Without hesitation, Cassandra called the police, her voice shaking as she explained the situation. It felt surreal, like something out of a movie, but she knew she couldn't let Linda get away with this. When the police arrived, Linda was long gone, but the footage left little doubt about her involvement. The officers reviewed the video and assured Cassandra they would follow up. Cassandra insisted on pressing charges for trespassing and property damage, and the officers promised to include the evidence in their report. The following day, Linda appeared on Cassandra's doorstep, her usual smile replaced with a look of thinly veiled hostility. "You called the police on me," she demanded, her voice low and cold. "You broke into my backyard and vandalized my pool?" Cassandra shot back, her own voice firm. "I'm done playing games, Linda. Stay off my property." Linda's eyes narrowed, and for the first time, Cassandra saw a crack in her carefully constructed facade. "You think you can scare me with your little cameras and your calls to the police? This neighborhood isn't big enough for people like you, Cassandra. You don't belong here." Cassandra stepped closer, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Maybe I don't belong here, Linda, but that doesn't mean you get to drive me out. Try this again, and I promise you'll regret it. Linda's lips pressed into a thin line, but she said nothing more. She turned sharply on her heel and marched back to her house, leaving Cassandra standing in the doorway, her heart pounding. Cassandra knew this wasn't over. Linda wasn't the type to back down easily, and the conflict had reached a point of no return. But for the first time, Cassandra felt a flicker of confidence. She wasn't just reacting anymore. She was standing her ground. Still, a nagging voice in the back of her mind warned her that Linda's next move could be even more dangerous. Whatever was driving her obsession with the pool and with Cassandra wasn't going to disappear overnight. Cassandra had to be ready for anything. The week following Linda's late-night sabotage felt like a storm cloud hanging over Cassandra's life. While the police had assured her they would investigate, Cassandra wasn't naive enough to believe the situation would resolve itself. Linda's audacity, coupled with her ability to appear untouchable, made Cassandra wonder just how far her neighbor was willing to go. Despite the evidence from the security cameras, Linda seemed unfazed. Cassandra's first step was to fortify her position. She filed a formal complaint with the police department, including the footage of Linda trespassing and tampering with the pool. Her lawyer, a pragmatic woman named Elena, advised her to focus on building a solid case. Linda's actions are personal, but legally we need to stick to provable facts. Trespassing and property damage are clear-cut, but don't engage with her emotionally. Let the evidence speak for itself, Elena had said firmly during their consultation. The next few days were quiet, almost eerily so. Linda's usual antics, passive-aggressive comments lingering near the fence, and her overly sweet smile were noticeably absent. Cassandra was wary of the calm, sensing it wasn't a retreat but a prelude to something bigger. Her instincts proved correct one sunny afternoon when a white SUV pulled into her driveway. Cassandra had been trimming the hedges along her fence when a man in a button-down shirt and khakis stepped out, holding a clipboard. His expression was neutral but officious, the kind that screamed authority. "Good afternoon, ma'am," he said, approaching her with measured steps. "I'm Daniel Brooks, from the County Environmental Office. We've received a complaint about your property, specifically regarding your pool." Cassandra's heart sank, though she maintained a composed exterior. "A complaint?" she repeated. "Yes," Daniel said, consulting his clipboard. "We've been informed that the pool is improperly maintained and poses a potential hazard to the local water supply. There are allegations of chemical runoff and drainage violations. I'm here to conduct an inspection and verify the claims." Cassandra clenched her jaw, immediately recognizing Linda's fingerprints all over this. "There's no issue with my pool," she said firmly. "I've had it professionally maintained, and the water is chemically balanced." Daniel nodded, his tone neutral. "I understand, ma'am, but I'm required to follow up on all formal complaints. May I take a look at the pool?" Cassandra hesitated. Formal complaints. May I take a look at the pool? She didn't want to appear uncooperative, but refusing would only raise suspicions. "Fine," she said finally, leading him to the backyard. Daniel conducted a thorough inspection, taking notes and snapping photos as he went. Cassandra stood to the side, arms crossed, watching him closely. After what felt like an eternity, he straightened up and turned to her. "From what I can see, there's no immediate issue," he said. "The water quality appears fine, and there's no evidence of drainage violations. I'll file my report and close the complaint unless additional information comes to light." Relief washed over Cassandra, but it was tempered by anger. Linda had weaponized the local authorities against her, using bureaucracy as a tool to harass her further. As Daniel left, Cassandra decided it was time to take a more proactive approach. She called Elena and explained what had happened. "This is harassment," Cassandra said, her voice tight with frustration. "It is, Elena," her lawyer agreed. "But it's also a pattern. Linda is escalating because she hasn't faced real consequences yet. We need to focus on proving that pattern, showing that her actions aren't isolated incidents but part of a deliberate campaign against you." Elena's advice gave Cassandra a renewed sense of purpose. That evening, she began compiling every piece of evidence she had: emails, texts, photos, security footage, and even notes about Linda's behavior since their first interaction. She wanted to be ready for whatever came next. But Linda wasn't done yet. 2 days later, Cassandra came home to find a crowd of neighbors gathered on the sidewalk in front of her house. At the center of the group stood Linda, animatedly gesturing as she spoke. Cassandra's stomach tightened as she parked her car and approached cautiously. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice cutting through the murmurs. Linda turned to face her, her expression one of feigned innocence. "Oh, Cassandra, we were just discussing some concerns about the neighborhood. Some of the other residents feel that the pool might not be safe, especially for children who could wander in unsupervised. You understand, of course. We just want to make sure everyone's safe." Cassandra's eyes scanned the group, noting the uncomfortable expressions on some of her neighbors' faces. It was clear Linda had rallied them, likely feeding exaggerated or false stories to stoke their fears. "My pool is private property," Cassandra said firmly. "It's secured with a locked gate, and no one has access without my permission. There's no safety issue." Linda's smile didn't waver, but her tone turned sharper. "We're just trying to be proactive, Cassandra. It's better to address these concerns before something happens. I've even spoken with the community association about this. They're very supportive of finding a resolution." Cassandra's patience snapped. "You mean you're trying to force me to give up my pool?" she said, her voice icy. "This has nothing to do with safety, and everything to do with your obsession with controlling what isn't yours." A hush fell over the crowd as Linda's smile faltered. For a brief moment, the mask slipped, and Cassandra saw the raw hostility in her eyes. But Linda quickly recovered, turning to the neighbors with a placating laugh. "Let's not make this personal," she said smoothly. "We're all just trying to look out for the community." Cassandra didn't respond. She turned on her heel and walked into her house, slamming the door behind her. Once inside, she leaned against the door, her hands shaking. Linda's campaign wasn't just about the pool. It was about isolating her and turning the neighborhood against her. That night, Cassandra received an email from Elena. The subject line read, "Potential strategy for escalation." Elena had attached a draft letter addressed to the local authorities, outlining Linda's pattern of behavior and formally requesting an investigation into her harassment. Cassandra read it carefully, feeling a spark of hope. But before she could hit send, her phone buzzed with another motion alert from the backyard cameras. She opened the app and saw a shadowy figure near the pool again. But this time, they weren't alone. Two people, one holding a flashlight and the other carrying what looked like a toolbox, were crouched near the fence. Cassandra's pulse quickened as she watched them try to jimmy the gate lock. Without hesitation, she called the police. This time, she wouldn't just file a report, she would demand action. The officers arrived quickly, catching the intruders in the act. To Cassandra's shock, neither was Linda, but both admitted they had been hired to conduct a safety assessment of the pool. When pressed, they revealed that Linda had paid them to break in under the guise of ensuring the property was up to code. As the officers escorted the pair away, Cassandra felt a strange mix of vindication and unease. Linda's willingness to involve others in her schemes proved just how far she was willing to go and how dangerous she could be. This wasn't just a neighborhood dispute anymore. It was war. And Cassandra knew she had to be ready for whatever came next. The aftermath of the police catching Linda's hired inspectors marked a turning point in the feud, but it didn't bring the closure Cassandra had hoped for. If anything, Linda's brazenness only seemed to grow. The very next morning, Cassandra spotted her neighbor standing on the sidewalk across from her house, chatting with another resident. Linda gestured toward Cassandra's backyard as she spoke, her voice loud enough to carry across the street. "It's just such a shame when people aren't willing to work with their community," Linda said, her tone dripping with mock disappointment. "We all have a responsibility to maintain the neighborhood standards, don't we?" Cassandra ignored her, pretending not to hear as she walked to her car, but she could feel Linda's eyes on her, sending a chill down her spine. It wasn't just petty games anymore. Linda wanted to make her life unbearable, one step at a time. 2 days later, Cassandra came home to find a bright orange sticker plastered on her front door. The words, "Notice of Code Violation," were printed in bold, with a checklist of alleged infractions: improper pool maintenance, unapproved backyard modifications, and failure to comply with neighborhood regulations. Cassandra tore the notice down, her hands shaking with fury. It didn't take a genius to figure out who was behind this. Linda had clearly filed yet another complaint, this time using vague regulatory language to force another inspection. Cassandra called the phone number on the sticker, and after being transferred between departments, she finally got someone on the line. "Hello, ma'am, I see the complaint here," said the man on the phone, his tone professional but detached. "We received an anonymous tip about potential violations on your property. It's standard procedure to investigate." "Anonymous?" Cassandra asked sharply, though she already knew the answer. "And what exactly am I being accused of?" "From what's listed here, it looks like concerns about chemical runoff from your pool, as well as structural changes that may not have been approved by local zoning authorities," he replied. "If you'd like, I can schedule an inspection to verify the claims." Cassandra exhaled slowly, fighting the urge to snap. "Fine, schedule it. But just so you know, this is harassment. The person making these complaints has a personal vendetta against me." "I understand your frustration, ma'am," the man said diplomatically. "But I can only follow up on the complaints as they come in." The inspection was scheduled for the following week, giving Cassandra a short window to prepare. She reached out to Elena, who immediately advised her to gather every piece of documentation related to the pool and her property. Cassandra spent hours poring over receipts, contracts, and emails, ensuring she had proof that everything was up to code. But Linda wasn't content to wait for the inspection to play out. That weekend, Cassandra woke to find another unwelcome surprise. Someone had scrawled graffiti on the wooden fence surrounding her backyard. The words "neighborhood hazard" were painted in large, uneven letters, the bright red paint glaring against the natural wood. Cassandra's stomach twisted as she stared at the vandalism. The paint was still fresh, dripping onto the grass below, and the sight filled her with cold fury. She immediately checked the footage from her security cameras, hoping to catch Linda in the act. But the footage showed only a dark figure in a hoodie, their face obscured, moving quickly along the fence line before disappearing into the night. She called the police again, filing yet another report. The responding officer was sympathetic but realistic. "Without a clear ID, it's hard to do much," he admitted. "It could have been anyone, but it's worth mentioning that repeated incidents like this can be used to build a case for harassment if you're dealing with an ongoing situation." Cassandra nodded, her frustration mounting. Linda was careful, always working through others or keeping just enough distance to avoid direct consequences. But she was also predictable, and Cassandra was determined to use that to her advantage. When the day of the inspection arrived, Cassandra was ready. The inspector, a no-nonsense woman named Diane, methodically checked every item on the complaint list. Cassandra accompanied her through the backyard, providing documentation and pointing out the security features she had installed to ensure everything was safe and secure. By the end of the visit, Diane seemed satisfied. "From what I can see, there are no violations," she said, flipping through her clipboard. "I'll submit my findings to the department, and the case should be closed." Cassandra felt a wave of relief, though it was short-lived. She knew Linda wouldn't let this setback stop her. If anything, it would only provoke her further. Her suspicions were confirmed the very next day. Cassandra woke to find a letter in her mailbox, hand-delivered and unsigned. Inside was a single sheet of paper, printed with the words, "We'll see who lasts longer." Cassandra stared at the note, her mind racing. It was a direct threat, but Linda had been careful not to include anything that could definitively link it back to her. Still, Cassandra knew it was only a matter of time before Linda made her next move. That evening, as Cassandra reviewed her legal options with Elena, her phone buzzed with another motion alert. She opened the camera app and froze. Linda was standing at the edge of the fence, her phone pointed at the backyard as though she were taking photos or videos. Cassandra's blood boiled. She grabbed her phone and marched outside, not bothering to hide her anger. "Linda, what are you doing?" Linda didn't flinch. She lowered her phone slowly and gave Cassandra a saccharine smile. "Oh, I was just documenting some concerns for the community. Nothing personal, of course." "This is harassment," Cassandra snapped. "Stay off my property and stop interfering with my life." Linda's smile didn't waver. "Harassment? Don't be ridiculous, Cassandra. I'm just looking out for the neighborhood. But if you think you're being targeted, maybe you should reconsider how you're handling things. Sometimes it's better to cooperate." Cassandra clenched her fists, fighting the urge to lash out. "I don't need your advice, Linda, and I don't need you watching me." Linda's expression hardened, her voice dropping to a cold whisper. "You might want to rethink that attitude. This neighborhood can be unforgiving to people who don't fit in." Cassandra didn't respond. She turned and walked back into her house, slamming the door behind her. She felt shaken but resolute. Linda's words were a thinly veiled threat, but they only strengthened Cassandra's resolve to fight back. She spent the next few days reinforcing her defenses, both literal and figurative. She added additional locks to the gates, upgraded her camera system, and worked with Elena to prepare a formal harassment complaint. But deep down, she knew these measures were only temporary. Linda wasn't going to stop until she either got what she wanted or was forced to face the consequences. The battle wasn't over yet, and Cassandra was determined to win. The night after Linda's veiled threat, Cassandra lay awake in bed, her mind racing with everything that had happened. Every time she thought Linda couldn't escalate further, she proved Cassandra wrong. This wasn't just petty harassment anymore. It was a full-scale campaign to break her resolve. But Cassandra wasn't about to let Linda win. Her decision to act came the next morning when she received a letter from the local zoning board. The letter, written in dense bureaucratic language, stated that an anonymous complaint had been filed alleging her pool violated property line regulations. The board required her to attend a hearing to present proof of compliance. Cassandra felt her frustration boil over as she clutched the letter. This was Linda's doing. She didn't need evidence to know that. It was yet another attempt to tie her up in red tape and make her life miserable. But this time, Cassandra was ready. She called Elena and outlined the situation. Elena, who had been following the conflict closely, immediately saw an opportunity. "This is exactly what we've been waiting for," she said. "Linda has escalated to the point where she's involving official entities, which means we can present a pattern of behavior. Bring every piece of evidence you have, photos, videos, police reports. If Linda's complaint is baseless, we'll use this hearing to turn the tables on her." Over the next few days, Cassandra worked tirelessly to prepare. She compiled a detailed timeline of Linda's harassment, complete with dates, descriptions, and supporting documents. She printed out stills from her security camera footage, including the video of Linda dumping chemicals into the pool. She even gathered testimonials from the pool maintenance company and the inspector who had cleared her property of violations. When the day of the hearing arrived, Cassandra walked into the municipal building with Elena by her side. The room was small, with rows of folding chairs and a long table at the front, where members of the zoning board sat. Linda was already there, seated primly with a smug expression on her face. Cassandra refused to acknowledge her. Instead, she focused on presenting her case with calm determination. Elena took the lead, walking the board through the evidence with methodical precision. "Linda James, the complainant, has repeatedly filed baseless accusations against my client," Elena stated. "This isn't about zoning regulations. It's about a targeted campaign of harassment. We have video evidence of Miss James trespassing, tampering with private property, and hiring individuals to unlawfully access my client's backyard. These actions aren't just petty, they're illegal." Elena presented each piece of evidence in turn, laying it out on the table for the board to review. The members listened intently, their expressions growing more serious as the extent of Linda's behavior became clear. When it was Linda's turn to speak, her confidence faltered. She stammered as she tried to justify her complaints, claiming she was only acting in the neighborhood's best interest. But her arguments sounded weak compared to the mountain of evidence against her. Cassandra watched as Linda's composure cracked. For the first time, the power dynamic shifted, and Linda was the one on the defensive. The board deliberated briefly before issuing their decision. Not only was the complaint dismissed as baseless, but they also referred the matter to the local authorities for further investigation into Linda's actions. As the hearing concluded, Linda stormed out of the room, her face red with humiliation. Cassandra felt a wave of relief wash over her, but it was tempered by exhaustion. The battle had taken its toll, but she had finally secured a decisive victory. Outside the building, Elena turned to Cassandra with a small smile. "This won't erase everything Linda put you through, but it's a start. If she tries anything else, we'll be ready." Cassandra nodded, her resolve strengthening. Linda had underestimated her, but now the tables had turned. For the first time in weeks, Cassandra felt a glimmer of hope that her life could return to normal. In the weeks following the hearing, the neighborhood began to feel different. Linda's once dominant presence had all but disappeared. She no longer paraded around the streets or held court with her group of allies. Her defeat had sent ripples through the community, and neighbors who had previously avoided Cassandra began to approach her with quiet support. "I'm so sorry for everything you've been through," said one woman, a soft-spoken mother named Emma who lived across the street. "Linda has done things like this before, but never to this extent. We didn't know how bad it had gotten." Cassandra appreciated the sentiment, though she couldn't entirely shake the frustration that no one had stepped in sooner. Still, the solidarity gave her a renewed sense of confidence. For the first time since the ordeal began, she felt like the neighborhood was no longer against her. Linda, on the other hand, had retreated into the shadows. Rumors swirled that the ongoing investigation into her actions had revealed other incidents of harassment, including complaints from former neighbors. Cassandra avoided getting involved, preferring to focus on rebuilding her peace of mind. One morning, as she sipped her coffee by the pool, Cassandra allowed herself to fully relax. The water sparkled under the sunlight, and the backyard, once a battleground, now felt like a sanctuary again. The graffiti on the fence had been scrubbed away, the cameras were functioning perfectly, and every corner of the property felt secure. Her lawyer, Elena, had been instrumental in the process, ensuring that Linda faced consequences for her actions. A restraining order was issued, barring Linda from contacting Cassandra or interfering with her property. While the order didn't undo the damage Linda had caused, it was a powerful symbol of accountability. A few days later, Cassandra received a handwritten note in her mailbox. For a brief moment, her stomach clenched, fearing it was another veiled threat. But when she opened it, she was surprised to find an apology. The note was from Linda. The handwriting was shaky, and the tone was uncharacteristically subdued. "I overstepped," the note read. "I was wrong, and I regret what I've done. I hope you can find peace, even if you can't forgive me." Cassandra stared at the note for a long time. She didn't know whether to believe the words or dismiss them as another manipulation. Ultimately, it didn't matter. Linda's apology wasn't the closure Cassandra needed. She had found that on her own by standing her ground and reclaiming her life. In the months that followed, Cassandra continued to improve her home. She added a few flowering plants around the patio, installed soft string lights that made the backyard glow at night, and even hosted a small gathering for some of the neighbors who had supported her. As she stood by the pool one evening, watching the reflections dance on the water's surface, Cassandra felt a deep sense of pride. The house, the pool, the life she was building, it was all hers, and no one could take that away from her. Linda had tried to break her, but Cassandra had emerged stronger. The peace she felt now wasn't just the absence of conflict. It was the reward of resilience, a testament to her ability to stand up for herself even in the face of relentless adversity. Her new life was finally her own,